but Marie Scanlon was sending me email telling me 2 hours, 1 or 2 hours before the bus was going to arrive, "Oh, I wanted to let you know that we have a bus coming, and be on it." And she already knew that I couldn't get to a bus station in 1 to 2 hours. And I needed 24 hours notice because I was in an area that did not have bus transportation, and I had to arrange to get a ride over to Bellingham to then get on the bus, get to the Greyhound station, and take the bus to Wenatchee. So they had that email from me. I sent it again after I missed the bus, and then she accused me of missing the visit to my son. So then I was being harassed about, why did you miss the visit? Why did you miss this visit to your son? And they started holding it against me. They started counting it as not cooperating with Child Protective Services. And like abandoning my son, not wanting to visit my son. So I sent another email asking them to please give me 24-hour notice. And I was obviously they knew this was going to be distressing to me, because I was already distraught and wanting to see my son, and they had already stalled for over a month and a half. So then they knew it was going to upset me to schedule a bus at the last minute, knowing that I couldn't catch it. So then they did this again to me. They did it 3 or 4 times in a row, week after week. And after that happened, finally they gave me the 24-hour notice that I needed before I got to the Greyhound station and got on a bus. By that time, almost 2 months had gone by, and my son hadn't seen me. And from every account, my son was extremely traumatized. He was hysterical, and he lost 7 pounds as a baby. He lost 7 pounds from the time that he was out of my care, and in the care of CPS. And he lost that weight because he couldn't eat, because he was so emotionally traumatized and depressed. He was 1.5 at the time. He was eating some solid foods, and I was still expressing milk, so he still was he still had breast milk. And then we ate together. We ate solid foods together. And my son, they later I accused them of what they had done, and I pointed to the fact that my son was so distraught that he had lost all that weight because he couldn't eat. And they later tried to claim that my son was underweight when they picked him up, which was a lie, because my son was weighed in Canada. When my son was with me in Canada, we went to a medical clinic because we had the bronchitis, and both I and my son were weighed on a scale, and that weight was documented. And the weight that my son was weighed at compared to the weight that my son was at when I first saw him at his first visit, because I got some notes that that reflected what his weight was and his welfare and well-being. His weight was 7 pounds different. He had lost 7 pounds from the time that he was weighed in Canada to 1.5 to 2 months later, when he was weighed by CPS, by the CPS assigned doctor. So it was due to these criminal actions of collusion that my son was traumatized. And I was harassed because they refused to provide the transportation, and they knew that it was going to upset me. I was then talking to some different people, and I had someone telling me, but Marie Scanlon is a Christian. And she didn't act like a Christian at all. She was the one writing every single one of these emails, and she was the one responsible for giving me the notice ahead of time, which she didn't do. So it doesn't matter if Marie Scanlon goes to church, because church and going to church doesn't make you a Christian, and it doesn't mean that you have ethics and values that are conducive to a job which is supposed to be protecting children. And I remember thinking, just being sort of shocked. She supposedly wasn't a Catholic, so she obviously had nothing against me from being offended if I had sued the Catholic Church. And I really wondered what her motivation was for lying and causing this kind of distress in taking my son when she was supposedly a Protestant Christian. And to this day, I don't know what her motives were. All I can say is that her actions spoke much louder than any words from anybody that told me that she was a Christian. She's not a Christian. That is not a Christianity that anyone should be a member of or want to claim for themselves. So then I was then seeing my son, and the visitation monitor was a woman who had been in Canada or was Canadian, sort of a Canadian/American citizen. And her name was Shirley. She, I believe, I was never given any of the documentation. I was given maybe 1 or 2 records from those visits. The state was supposed to give me copies of any of the notes made about me and my son in those visits. I had a legal right to it. It was like discovery for me to be able to defend myself and to be able to say whether or not I agreed with this report and whether it was true or it sounded defamatory or not. I had a right to make corrections to it or to take it to a judge and say this is not right. And by law, CPS was required to give me copies of their visitation notes, and they didn't. So I really didn't have any idea how anyone was writing these visits up as. I believe that at first, I think that Shirley was halfway normal about it, wrote like fairly normal reports, and commented about the bond that we had, because my son was clearly very bonded to me still, and of course he would be. And it was at that point that Russ Haugen, who is the director for CPS, called me up, and it was after hours, it was after 5 o'clock. He called me and said, while I was in Birch Bay at this Lions hostel place, he called me up and said, I would like to, what would you do if we just threw this whole thing out? If we just dismissed this whole case? He talked to me for about an hour and a half, and then he was proposing throwing the entire thing out. I don't know too many CPS employees or directors that would even bring up the idea of throwing a case out to somebody unless they knew they didn't have a case to start with and that they could be legally liable for continuing. And I probably shouldn't have been as honest as I was. I shouldn't have said what I had said. I mean, maybe I should have lied and said, well, I'll try to work with you however I can, whatever. I mean, I could have said something like that, but they had colluded to put me in jail, kidnapped my son, written a false report about me. They had no grounds to do it. They had no legal basis for doing it at all. And they knew it. And I said, I would sue. I said, it doesn't matter if you drop it, I'm still going to sue you. And I said this in like a state of total distress. But I said that to him over the phone. I said, I'm still going to sue for my son's damages. That, of course, anyone might be able to guess is not what he wanted to hear. And I think that they felt, well, if she's going to sue anyway, then we may as well do our very best to cover this up. We just have to cover it up the best we can, because if we dismiss it, she's going to sue. If we hold on to this case, maybe if we cover it up and smear her enough, she won't have cause to sue. We can muddy her so badly that there is no lawsuit. So that's what they did. They decided to keep the case at that point, and never made that offer of throwing out the whole case again. So basically, this is how the state of Washington works, and their attorney generals work, because the attorney generals were involved. Maybe Eric Holder could look into this record. And honestly, if he did look into it, he's not, anything that's written down by them is going to be a sham I mean, he can't trust anything that he reads. Anything that he would read would make me sound like a lunatic, and sound like they've crossed all their T's and done their P's and Q's and just right. But if someone looked into it, the Attorney General is guilty of, of a kidnapping. And so basically that's the angle they decided to take. Is they couldn't just drop the case, I guess, because they were worried that I was going to sue anyway. So they decided to smear me. And at that point, I also think that an attorney general person, a prosecuting attorney in Spokane was involved, because Spokane was the closest to the border at that time. It was the Spokane FBI and 8 attorney general jurisdiction. And my son's social security number was applied for later in Spokane against my wishes, when after they decided to take my son from me. They took him to Spokane to have this reassigned to him when I had it revoked. And my parental rights were not terminated either. And my son was not in any kind of imminent harm or danger, because the report said nothing about imminent harm or danger. All it said was that there was a dirty house, and even that was a lie. But even if somebody looked at that report, all they had was a dirty house, and a child is not in imminent harm over that. They had no legal grounds for assigning a social security number to my son, and they knew that it was against my wishes. So then CPS and the state did other things that were deliberately to harass me. After they had the bus situation, quote unquote, straightened out, they then began dropping they're also required to provide a hotel, like accommodations where you would stay while you visit your child, and they began dropping the accommodations. So I was showing up in town with being told to go to a certain hotel, and then I would get to the hotel and they would say, "We don't have anything for you." Like nothing from CPS had gone to their offices at all. So basically I was getting to town, with the state knowing that I was going to be arriving at a certain time, because they scheduled the bus ticket, and then I didn't have any place to stay, and they were required to provide that. I had to ask a couple of times, ask a hotel if they would do not a rain check, but sort of take my word for it type of a thing. Will you please let me just have a place? I know that the state is required to let you know. A couple of times, and I think both times that this happened, for whatever reason, the hotel went ahead and let me stay there, and then they did get billing from the state, or they contacted the state and got paid later. However, I was pretty much being set up a couple times to, wander around, making calls, trying to find out why my hotel wasn't in place, my hotel room. And about that time, it was when I was first back in Wenatchee to visit my son. I had Judge Gerald Warren, the same judge who had committed crimes 3 different times and been part of my cases 3 different times on behalf of others, drive past me in the middle of the night with a Wenatchee police officer following behind him, both of them laughing at me, and there was no one else on the road. I think that I got hungry or something. I decided to get something. I couldn't sleep. I was still traumatized from everything. I couldn't sleep. I decided to go to a 7-Eleven or 24-hour store to get something. And when I was walking on the sidewalk, there were no other cars. It was very late. It was maybe 1 o'clock in the morning. And Gerald Warren comes driving by.